The fastest way to learn to communicate in Chinese is to learn classroom expressions first. Master essential phrases that help you learn Mandarin without relying on English. Hello and welcome to the Hacking Chinese podcast. In this week's episode, we are going to talk about classroom phrases, or language that's necessary to learn Chinese in Chinese. One of the biggest problems with the way Chinese is taught to adults around the world is that it tends to be done largely in English, or sometimes in other countries in the student's native language. This means that the students will be learning about the language rather than learning the language, and these are two different things. Don't think that being able to describe how a grammar pattern works actually means that you will be able to use it or even understand it in context. Similarly, the best way to learn what words mean and how they are used is to encounter them repeatedly in context when you listen and read, and then also when you yourself communicate in spoken or written Chinese. I'm not saying that cutting out English entirely is a good idea. Sometimes it really is good to just have a translation of something to be able to confirm that you've understood, but if your base language in class is English, I think something is wrong. In order to learn Chinese, you need to immerse in it, and the earlier you start, the better. As a student then, it's very important to learn the most useful words first, because they will enable you to immerse in the language. I said the most useful words first, not the most common ones in the language, because if you just take a frequency table and look at what are the most common words in Chinese, some of them are actually not the most common ones for you as a beginner student. They are the most common ones in the language as a whole, although these sources are usually based on written Chinese and not spoken Chinese, but this does not mean that they are the most useful ones for you, because what's most useful as a student is to be able to talk about what you are doing, and that is learning Chinese. Sure, there is a lot of overlap between a frequency list and a usefulness list, and so we always need basic pronouns like I and you, and we need basic verbs like to have, to say, and things like that. But beyond that, there really isn't that much overlap between the top of a frequency list and the top of a usefulness list for students. Even though standard textbooks do cover some of the most important vocabulary for beginners, there is a set of words and phrases that really is neglected and never really taught in most textbook series I've looked at. And that is classroom expressions. And I'm going to argue that these are much more important than most of the phrases in your textbook, and yet they are often left out. Just to mention two examples, a phrase like 中文怎么说? i.e. how do you say this in Chinese, or 请再说一遍, please say that again, is much more important to learn than phrases that are common in beginner textbooks, such as 你喜欢吃中国菜吗? Or do you like to eat Chinese food? Or 今天是我的生日, today is my birthday. When learning Chinese, I think I've used the first two phrases about asking what something means and asking someone to say something again thousands of times, literally, whereas the latter two I think I've never ever said in a real conversation. Yet, classroom expressions are exceedingly rare in beginner textbooks, whereas phrases like the other two I mentioned are very common. My goal with this episode and the accompanying article on Hacking Chinese is to rectify this by publishing the ultimate list of classroom expressions in Chinese. Since these are neglected in most standard textbooks, you're mostly left on your own, and so I hope you as a student find this list useful. Before we move on, let's discuss briefly how I think you should use this list and how you should learn the phrases on it. I did say the ultimate list. That doesn't mean I've included everything, but it does mean that I've included more things than you might need, especially if you just started learning Chinese. There are also some words and expressions that are particularly useful for some students in some settings, for example online versus offline, or maybe you're enrolled in a formal course versus studying on your own, and then you might also need slightly different types of phrases. This is why I have split the list into several categories that I will go through in a bit, and as long as you stick to categories that are relevant to you, you can safely learn everything in that category. I have not included anything that is not useful or very high frequency. Still, it is of course a matter of priority. You can't learn everything at once, so learn those that seem most important to you first. And those are the ones that you find yourself needing to use the most. So this is a general rule of thumb. If you find yourself wanting to say something or needing to say something in English over and over, then it's a good idea to learn that in Chinese as quickly as possible. When learning these classroom expressions, it's perfectly fine to learn them as chunks. You do not need to understand how they are constructed, what each word means, why it's there, and things like that. Just learn them as a chunk and use it as a chunk. For example, in a phrase like 中文怎么说, you don't need to understand what the individual words mean. You will learn this very quickly if you haven't already. You might already know, for example, that 中文 means Chinese, but how to use 怎么 is not something you should focus on right now. Just learn this as a unit and treat it as a unit and use it as such. You want to use these for communicative needs and immersion in Chinese. It's not to teach you the underlying grammar or how vocabulary works and so on. And if you were to analyze every single sentence and learn why they are the way they are and why the vocabulary is structured the way it is and so on, it would take you at least a semester to learn this list. And the whole point is to use it as a springboard to be able to learn Chinese in Chinese. So don't bother with the details, just learn them as chunks. If you're a teacher, feel free to share the list with your students, and I suggest you use these expressions yourself in class all the time, and you encourage the students to do so as well. It can be useful to print the most important phrases and have them as cheat sheets on the walls or at least available to the students somehow. It depends a little bit on the age of the students, but in general, students shouldn't have to think about how to say these things, and the more they use them, the more natural it will be for them. And as I just mentioned, avoid the temptation to try to explain all these phrases. You just teach them as chunks and the students will use them as chunks. Then later, when you need to explain a specific grammar pattern or it feels natural to do so in some other context, then you can connect back to these sentences that they already know and have used maybe hundreds of times by then. If you, as a teacher or student, have suggestions for things that I might have missed or definitely should add to this list, just leave a comment on Hacking Chinese. This brings us to the ultimate list of classroom Chinese for students and teachers. And I'm not going to read through the whole list here in this episode. I don't think that will be time well spent either for me or you. But I will talk about how the list is structured and what you will find if you go to the article linked to in the show notes of this episode. As mentioned before, I've split the list into several sections so you can focus on the one that matters most to you and also so you can ignore things that might not be relevant to you. There are 6 categories, and the first one is ensuring comprehension and asking for clarification. And we've already seen a few examples of that, such as asking what something means, making sure you understand what's going on, asking someone to repeat themselves, speak more slowly, and so on. The second category is lesson and learning activity flow. So this is about managing lesson pace, group work, transitions, and so on. And to make it a little bit less abstract, it's learning things like when we start and finish class, when we take breaks, and how to say we're continuing again, how to ask for more time, or how to say who's going to say what, and if you want to try something out, and things like that. Category 3 is feedback and encouragement. So this is about offering praise and asking for improvement suggestions, tips, help, and so on. And it's also what teachers might use when they encourage students and what you might say in return. Category 4 is about talking about the Chinese language in Chinese. And this is, of course, at a very basic level. We're not talking about advanced phonetics, but rather things like how to ask what a tone a character has, or if your tones are correct here, or how the grammar is supposed to work here, or if your grammar is indeed understandable. If you're interested in this, I also have a separate article specifically about learning Chinese in Chinese, which goes into much more detail, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Then we have category 5, which is online and technology-related phrases. So this is language specific to using technology, maybe learning online, such as dealing with cameras, microphones, are you muted, you are muted, I cannot hear you, there's lag, things like this that are kind of essential to say even as a pure beginner if you're learning Chinese online. Finally, category 6 is formal, education-specific phrases. So these are things that are not relevant if you're just learning Chinese for fun or because you are interested, but to deal with things like tests, homework, and other things that teachers might have to deal with when following an official or standard curriculum of some sort. So those are the 6 categories, and like I said, I'm not going to read through all the classroom phrases here, but if you want an audio version where a native teacher has recorded all these phrases for your benefit, you can check out my beginner course Unlocking Chinese, which is all about giving you a good start, either if you just started or are about to start, or you've been learning for a while and want to make sure you haven't missed anything important. In the free article on Hacking Chinese, I have listed all the phrases, both in simplified and traditional Chinese, and it also includes pinyin and a translation to English. You can also download both of these as Google documents or Word files if you prefer. I hope that you'll find the list useful and that it will boost your ability to learn Chinese in Chinese. And if you do like it, please share it with other students and teachers. Thank you for tuning in to the Hacking Chinese podcast. If you like this episode, please share it. More information and inspiration about learning and teaching Chinese can be found at hackingchinese.com. See you in the next episode, and until then, good luck with your studies.